Okay.
Oh.
Hi. Third demo. My name is Bouwmeester, and I'm joined on stage by Geir, Sjurseth. We are both working in Google for Apogee. We are helping customers with their API journey, and we've taken the liberty to actually build a custom demo for today. We are also a bit disobedient because the title is also different than you might see in the program. It's called a lightning demo. So what we have done actually is to think a bit on a real problem that we are having at this conference and build a solution for it. And that's what Geir is holding in his hands, and we'll look at it a bit more. It's connected to Apogee, and you'll get to we'll get to demo you a few parts of our product for this use case. So you might be really curious, what are you doing then? Well, this is a demo that helps us solve the visitor count or the busyness at our booth. We had it running today already at our booth, and we were measuring how many people were walking by actually, and it's tied into Apogee. So this is something we could use theoretically to actually measure how busy this booth is compared to other events. We can plan a little bit ahead if we know when there's busy times and everything like that, and maybe predict the staffing requirements we need for something like this. It's all fake, by the way, but this is the demo, right? So this is how it looks. For the guys in the back not seeing what Geir is holding, it's a cigar box, right? With a proximity sensor in it, and it will measure when something is passing by, and then fire it up to Apogee to make an API call. So that's all fine, but then where's API management coming in, and where is microservices coming in, right? So this is the setup. The cigar box all the way on the left makes an API call. It has two APIs. It can make itself known, register itself as a turnstile, as a device, and then when it measures something, it will make an API call as well to Apogee, saying, "There's a visitor. I've noticed something in front of my proximity sensor." So Apogee is there to receive those calls and proxy it for the service mesh. And there's two pods we have running. There's one for registering visitors, and also the one for registering the turnstile as a device. And we've put that on Kubernetes in Google Cloud. So on Apogee, what we are doing, and we will demo this later on, but we're having two API proxies, and they are guarded with Apogee for a spike arrest to make sure that there's not too many visitors coming by. And there's an API key verification where we're actually checking the key of this specific cigar box turnstile and protecting the API in a sort. Then we're forwarding that into this service mesh, which is running on Kubernetes with Istio. Istio already was mentioned in Geir's talk before, where he explained what the value is that Istio can do. Basically protect the calls between the different services, but also telemetry and routing. Right. So we are actually tying Apogee into that service mesh with our integration in the mixer to also enforce API key verification into the service mesh, and also getting telemetry back out of the service mesh into Apogee. So with this full setup, we're able to actually show you API management capabilities, both for the APIs exposed to the outside world, which is the cigar box, and also measuring and monitoring what's happening into the service mesh, into Istio. So that's enough talk, right? Let's show it, right? So Geir,
Yep.
Up to you.
Okay, so this demo is in multiple parts. I'm going to try. I've got a few minutes to try to get the pieces. So I'm going to open this up. And I don't know how well you guys can be able to see this, but what I have, as he said, is I've got a proximity sensor. So this is an ultrasonic sensor that basically sends a sound one way and then collects it on the other to measure distances, and I measure time for that. And then I've got a microcontroller. So it's an ESP8266, a very inexpensive microcontroller that I've coded some C++ code on that's going to basically connect to Apogee Edge. And when it connects, the first thing it does when it powers on is it looks for an IP address. It's going to connect with my phone because I don't trust. I'm scared to use the wireless here, and I want to make sure my demo is going to work. It's going to then download the default distance that it's going to register on. So by default, it's going to grab 70 centimeters. So if something passes within 70 centimeters of this, then it's going to register as a visitor. And then later, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show that I can update that. So I'm going to update that directly on the mesh. But even though this is actually consuming on Apogee Edge, so at the edge of it, just so we can show all these different pieces are connected. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to plug this in and turn it on. And it should connect to my phone. So that Cylon look means it's looking for an IP address. Hasn't gotten one yet. Now it's on. So it now has an IP address. And I'm going to switch to here. First of all, I'm going to give as rapidly as I can an overview of what Apogee is. So this is the look of our administrative console. I'm logged into the proxies view. Up here, you can see I've got a list of organizations. That's the top-level logical container for anything that we do inside of Apogee. And then inside Apogee, I have a number of environments. In this case, I got test and prod. And you can see here I've got two different APIs. I've got an API called turnstiles and an API called visitors. And just to start with, I'm going to jump inside of visitors. And this is the API that we use to register visitors that have visited our booth. And if I go over to develop, we're going to see that it's pretty simple. I've got a spike arrest policy. And basically the idea is this is a turnstile. And if we get too much attention in our booth because we're just that popular, then it's going to blink red in a strobe effect and tell us that, hey, we've got to slow down. So we've set that up to something. And then it's also going to try to verify an API key. So it's not going to let any traffic hit it if this device doesn't properly identify itself. Then on the tail end, it's actually calling into our Kubernetes environment, which I'll show you guys in a minute. So I'm going to jump to trace, and we're just going to see it do something so we can see that it's working. Start a trace session. I'm going to wave my hand in front of it, and it's going to, yep, turns yellow, turns red, right? So we're going to see these collect here. So the first one worked, second one worked, and the third one blocked here, right? So my spike arrest went into effect. The client code running on that microcontroller was set up to kind of do something with that information. In this case, it blocked and threw a red thing. And then it went back to listening to requests again. So now I can do the same thing again, and I get a little yellow blinky, and I can see that it's working, okay? So I've got a device talking into Apogee Edge, kind of brokering traffic that's ultimately going into my backend. If I zoom now into my backend, can you guys see that? Or should I make it even bigger? Make it a little bigger. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to get a list of all the turnstiles that I've registered. So you can see I've got a turnstile called test 3, test 4, and one here called Nordic demo style, right? Which is the one that's running at our booth. And you can see that distance is listed as 70. If I switch now to this one, I'm going to run a curl command also directly against my backend. And these are running against Kubernetes directly. So I'm skipping Apogee and going straight to the gateway running on Kubernetes that's managed by Istio. And I'm going to pull the visitors API out, again, passing an API key, and I'm going to get back a list. And I can see the latest one that went through was at 1319, which was really at 1519. So it just happened about 1 minute ago. And that's when I waved my hand in front of it just a second ago. And just to prove that this is actually working, if I go and I break this key, so I'm going to remove one letter that I'm going to get back, I get an error, right? And if I expose that error, you're going to see that I'm getting a permission denied because I'm not allowed to enter that key. And that's because Apogee is managing that authentication inside the control plane running an Apogee Edge, both for things coming into the edge there and things going directly into our Istio environment at the bottom. Okay, now, next thing I want to do is I actually want to update this. So rather than run at 70, I'm going to make it so it only responds at 30. So I've got a prepared curl command here. I'm going to update that backend so it updates to 30. I'm going to run that, and it's done. And if I cat that file, you're going to see that all I'm doing is I'm updating the name of that Nordic demo style, and I'm setting that distance to 30. Okay? And with that done, I will switch back to trace. Now I'm going to trace the other proxy, this time the turnstiles proxy, because the first thing that happens, as I said, when it turns on, is it goes and it fetches that information. So we're going to jump over to trace. I'll start a trace session, and now I'm just going to power cycle this or reset it. So it's bounced. Once again, the Cylon light's telling you that it's trying to fetch an IP. And it's got an IP, it's on. So now it's ready, and I can see it fetched some configuration. This little failure here is what it did is it checked to see if it already existed, if it already found a copy of this turnstile located in the database. It did, and so it returned that information. And so basically what it returned back to the client was this distance 30, right? So that's what I just updated in the back end from 70 to 30. So now if I try to activate it out here, it shouldn't work. But if I activate it a little closer, it should work again. And I did. I got a yellow. I got a thing there. So I'm able to kind of control how this is working through APIs. Through APIs, I control the configuration on remotely deployed devices that are using APIs themselves, coming into Apogee Edge at the outer edge of my network, all the way down into the back-end area where I'm running my real network services that are inside a Kubernetes mesh. And all of this managed by one and the same control plane. And the story kind of that we have here is that now that I've done all this, imagine that I take this data and I pull that into something like AutoML tables running in something like GCP to analyze the best possible distance. Right, so now I've experimented with 30, so we can imagine I decide, you know what, 30 is just not what I want. I want to go back, to 70. So I'm going to roll, and we've done some machine learning on this data set to conclude that that's probably the best way to do it. So I'm going to delete that record. It's gone. Go fetch it again so you can see that it's not there. So now my bottom one is test4, so I no longer have a Nordic style. And I'll make sure I'm still tracing here, and I'll bounce one last time. Okay, again, it's fetching an IP. It's got an IP. It's on, and we should see a request. So this time, you see here, it returned automatically because that record already existed. This time, it did not. So it tried to fetch that request. We managed to handle that kind of complexity that would be more difficult theoretically inside the mesh in an ad hoc way directly at the edge, realized we didn't have one, and then automatically create a record so this device could self-register. And ultimately, it spat back its distance in the form of this name and distance of 70. And indeed, if I go back here now and I do a query on that, we can see that I now have a Nordic demo style of 70. So that kind of concludes my demo. It's just kind of showing you that we can kind of be a live, active API management platform all the way out at the edge and all the way internal, no matter kind of where you need our needs.
Maybe you can show the analytics of...
Oh, yes, I got 1 minute. And just a little bit on analytics. If I jump in and I look at API metrics, we're going to see for the API proxy performance that I've got those 2 API proxies that we saw have gotten a lot of traffic. Those are Lightning demo turnstiles. When I zoom down, we can see these Lightning demo turnstiles, but there's also this visitor service, which is this one, which has gotten 1,334 hits today because we've been nailing it and people have been walking by our booth. And then also this Lightning demo visitors, which is the API proxy, istio auth, and so on. So each one of these are measured independently, and we can kind of amalgamate all that information in one and the same console.
Thank you.
Three minutes, okay.
So what? I think it was a cool demo, but so what? What do we really get with this, right? So we try to show you that with a solution like Apogee, we can help you manage your APIs both in the service mesh and also at the edge. The APIs you expose to the outside world, depicted here by the famous cigar box, right? So it allows you to actually also then enforce security and consumption, manage the consumption of those APIs. For APIs inside the service mesh, maybe we can access those APIs. Is it other services or maybe from outside the service mesh? But also at the edge, what kind of devices can actually use those APIs that you have exposed? We also looked at universal analytics. You'll be able to see what's happening inside the service mesh. How many API calls? Thousands of API calls inside the service mesh. But specifically also you're able to measure and see the analytics of the APIs coming, or the API calls coming outside, from the outside. And you can measure all the different turnstiles that are out there and how many API calls they are consuming. So there's a common application registration because it's all handled the same way by Apogee. Each of these services, if they are inside the service mesh or coming from outside, they are just handled as an application by Apogee. So the onboarding principle is the same. And you could, in theory, do that all through one single developer portal. And yeah, so this is part of the Google Cloud ecosystem. So you're able to actually tie very neatly into these kind of Kubernetes, Istio, but also things like Stackdriver, all these kind of different tools living inside the Google ecosystem. And Apogee is just a way to get into that and get access to it. So with that, thank you. Thank you for your attention. If you like to test this out, walk by our booth and you will be measured. You'll be fired with a few API calls. If you don't want to talk to us, that's fine. There's a lot of information online, cloud.google.com/Apogee. Thank you.